Today is Monday, and we're talking about Monday.
Let's go.
Monday from Holy Week. So yesterday, Sunday, triumphant entry. Jesus enters the city. He predicts his death. Then he goes into the temple.
Briefly into the temple, yeah.
Briefly into the temple. And so now we're into Monday, and there is kind of a bizarre event here with a fig tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's kind of talk through the events and hit some of the significance.
Yeah, so Jesus is in Bethany because that's where he retired to use the British word. He retires for the evening. So after he left Sunday night, he went back to Bethany, and then now he's going to go back to the temple. On his way to the temple, he curses a fig tree.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like...
That's not in season.
Yeah, that's not even in season. You're right. Yeah, it's like...
You shouldn't expect to see anything there.
Yeah.
And it says specifically that he's hungry, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's hungry.
He looks to a
No
fig tree.
figs. Curses it.
Yeah, so it's like, wow, that is a very sharp...
Seems harsh.
It seems harsh or sharp interaction.
He's like, let no figs ever come from you again.
Yeah, It's like, poor fig tree. You know what I mean? And then in the Mark account, speaking of being hungry, there's a Mark and sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we went through Mark, we noted this, that Mark will bring up a topic, there'll be another event or situation, and then he'll revisit the first topic.
Right.
And so that happened in Mark where he curses the fig tree. Then Jesus goes into the temple and does some stuff there, which we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mark engages the fig tree situation and why that had happened. And so that means that connects the whole thing together. So that means the fig tree incident, beginning and end, and then the middle, the meat of the sandwich is what happened in the temple. So what's happening in the temple is actually informing and describing, filling out, so to speak, what's going on with the fig tree. And what we learned from that is that, quite succinctly, Jesus is cursing Israel. Israel was often portrayed in the Old Testament prophets, Isaiah in particular, as a fig tree. And Jesus is, in a sense, saying, I've come to you, and you're not bearing fruit. You are not living into the vocation to which I've called you as my firstborn son. Be holy as I am holy in the Old Testament. Love your neighbor as I have loved you. Leviticus 19. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Exodus 19. You're supposed to be a kingdom of priests, a light to the nations. And so Israel has rejected this calling time and time again. And so God has now come to visit in the person of Jesus.
Right.
And they're not bearing fruit, and they are getting cursed.
And even remember yesterday, him weeping as he's heading into the city, the whole kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's what's going on with the fig tree, really. It seems pretty bizarre to us, but then when you made the comment yesterday, Chase, about how it is important to see these things together, and certainly the same thing here. If the fig tree is just some random incident and not connected to what's going on with the temple, then, yeah, it would be weird and bizarre. But now what Jesus is going into the temple, when he encounters the temple, there's the money changers. This is a very famous event that a lot of people know about. It happened on Monday. There's pilgrims that are coming from far away during Passover, and they need animals to sacrifice. And you need a non-blemished animal. So think about that. If you're going to try to make a 100-mile journey, for some of them, that would be the bigger ones. But even if it's a 50-mile journey and your animal might get blemished. So what people would do is they would maybe sell their animals at home, get some money. They'd bring that money to the temple, and then they would buy an unblemished animal there. But they would, whenever you're traveling, you always know things are expensive. People take advantage of you, you know what I mean? So, you're kind of at a disadvantage here. And so first, they would make you change your money, most scholars think, into the Tyrian currency. And so there'd be a little upcharge on that. And then you had to buy an animal there. And so they knew that, they kind of had you where they wanted you, and they would charge extra for the animals. And so
another word for all of that would be greed.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. This is what's happening.
Yes. Right. It's just greed.
It's easy to kind of accept a bunch of that and play along with that, but Jesus doesn't.
Jesus does not play along. He does not play nicely.
No.
So he comes in and he sees this, and to boot, as we mentioned yesterday, highlighting again, once again, the international scope of God has always been the nations. He created the world, Genesis 1 and 2. He wanted to bless the world, Genesis 1 and 2. When man fell, he chose Abraham, which seems exclusive because he's choosing Abraham, but it's not. He chooses Abraham so that Abraham might be a blessing to the nations.
Right.
And they're doing all this buying and selling in the court of the Gentiles, basically saying, you guys weren't going to worship here anyway, so we'll just use your space. Thank you very much. So, so that's what's going on, and Jesus is very frustrated. And again, once again, to highlight the nations, he says this house was supposed to be a house of prayer for all the nations. And so Jesus definitely has in mind his cosmic, eternal death and resurrection and mission on this day. And so he comes in and he cleanses the temple. And I said yesterday, I'm not a huge fan of the word cleansing because he didn't actually clean it. I mean, he
purified it in some sense.
He temporarily, they probably went back to buying and selling on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. You know what I mean? Like leading up to
set back up shop.
Yeah, they probably set shop. I mean, we don't know for sure. That's a little bit of speculation, but certainly the next year, the year after that, until the temple was destroyed in AD 70, they would have been doing that. And so what Jesus was doing here, and I think this is really powerful, is he's acting like a prophet. And oftentimes prophets would act out their message. So to give an example, let's use Hosea as he was one of the prophets. And Israel, it's a tough one. Israel was being unfaithful to their covenant with God.
Really relevant to the story.
Yes, exactly. And so God tells Hosea to marry a woman who would be unfaithful to him. And so Hosea ends up entering this marriage where back and forth this woman is being unfaithful to him. And that his acted out message, the prophet's very life is it's like declaring and demonstrating, as we say here. And so what Jesus is, when he comes in here, he's not just saying, hey, clean up your act, guys. He's saying, no, what I'm overturning tables and kicking people out and making room for the Gentiles and all this. That's actually what God is about to do to this place. God is going to destroy this temple, and he's going to make room for the Gentiles. Which is like, wow.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what is going to happen within a generation. And that's what Jesus predicts later on in the week when we get, I think it's going to be Thursday. He's going to specifically talk about the destruction of the temple. And so Jesus is coming in, and he's not just saying, hey, why don't you guys clean this up? He's saying, no, God is going to destroy this place. And what's what they're going to ask Jesus tomorrow is on by whose authority.
Right.
It's to point back to yesterday's comment, like what Jesus is doing here, there's no turning back.
No.
You come in here after 3 years of ministry, miracle worker, you come in riding on a donkey as a king, and you go straight to the temple the next day.
A bunch of people following you. Saying Hosanna.
Yeah, and all the poor people who are getting gouged by the greed, they're like, loving right now. They are loving
liberation.
This. Yeah, and it's so this is a very, very dramatic, powerful event that it requires a lot of courage and gumption and connection with the Lord and all this other kind of stuff with His Father, I should say, and. So that's what's happening when Jesus is quote unquote cleansing the temple. He's actually enacting judgment upon it. That's why the cleansing thing works, because of the greed, because of the corruption, because of the it's actually leading to false worship there, and those type of things. So
and even then you see the hardness of the Pharisees, the chief priests, and those guys. Of course, it's like he's now ruining their way of making money for sure by one, and then also. It's like the crowds are starting to follow this guy and not them. And so now their authority is challenged, their pockets are challenged, all that stuff. And so there's mixed emotions for sure. It's like Gentile people are like, woohoo, and then Pharisees are like, who is this guy? He needs to be taken care of, basically. He needs to be disposed of.
That contrast that you set up yesterday, or that we noticed yesterday from the entry, where you got some folks who are praising him, pronouncing him to be the king, and then certainly those in authority are going to have major problems with that very thing. Right. I mean, you can see that very clearly here, where this act of Jesus is good news to those who are oppressed and common, and really bad news or threatening news to those who are in power and authority. And it seems like that contrast is just going to, that opposition, that rub is just going to continue all week.
Yeah, it's going to continue to sharpen. And It's so interesting, too, because in one sense, Jesus really, if you have power, Jesus is not a threat to you. I mean, they perceive it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because you're trying to, like, as you said yesterday, and I like that, the illustration of, someone comes in and they're the boss, and then the company hires someone else, and now they're the boss. It's like, well, who actually is the boss here?
Yeah, to share the authority, and we often view that as you're losing authority.
Yeah.
And so, another person on the scene here just seems like a threat too great for them to bear as the week unfolds.
And, but if we would stop and think for a minute, it's like, well, who would I want to be king?
Mm-hmm.
Who would I want to run my life? And so if I'm willing to say, Jesus, I'm, because of who you are and what you can do, I mean, you can raise the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you get to be king.
Right.
So I think this story is, in a sense, begging us to see Jesus for who he is.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main goals, we would say, of a biography is to help the readers get to know who the main character is.
Right.
And this right here, these events, especially Sunday and Monday, are, again, signaling, to a perceptive reader. I love the Gospels, how kind of like shallow enough for new Christians to get into, but deep enough for, older
People
Christians
to
study for forever.
Mm-hmm.
That's signaling in all of these powerful ways that Jesus is the king.
Right.
He's Lord actually over the temple. And you think about, what does that mean? That Jesus is the one in charge of who has access to God.
Mm-hmm.
And the religious leaders are saying, if you want access to God, you got to play by our rules, you got to buy our animals, you got to do our things.
Right.
And Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you access to God, not as something that you earn or pay for, but something as a gift I'm going to offer myself.
Yeah.
And are you willing to come humbly? Are you willing to come as a child? It's powerful the day before he's healing the lame and the blind, and he's welcoming children. Again, it's just another witness to the kind of king and kingdom that this is. And so, if you're listening to this and the Lord has given you a platform or power or prestige, I would just be encouraged. He is not a threat to you. He is in no way a threat to you at all. To submit yourself to Jesus' leadership is the best and wisest decision anybody could ever make, and it says nothing about us. It's just because it says everything about who he is, the Son of God, the Son of Man. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, as they were saying on Sunday.
And even going back to the fig tree, it's like a challenge to us. It's like, are we the religious people who are following Jesus and not bearing fruit? And so there's kind of like that kind of thing there where it's like, am I on board with Jesus' mission here? Or am I kind of one of those who are standing opposed to it? And it kind of even just takes us back to, even Jonah, which we're going through. It's like, am I, who am I kind of in this story? And am I on Jesus' side? Am I in support of Jesus, standing with the oppressed? Or am I those who are, maybe just, kind of assuming on his grace and not really actually bearing fruit that Jesus may have been expecting from the fig tree or whatever.
Yeah, and a little foreshadowing too. And even the people that were excited about Jesus at this point, and there's some debate on this, but I think there's a third way through here. Some people are like, the crowds that hailed Jesus as Messiah were not the same that said crucify him. There's some good scholarship that would say those two crowds are separate. And there's good reasons to think that. And then there's some people that say, oh, they're definitely one and the same. But I think there's a moderating view. It's like,
for sure,
probably there was a little bit of a mix.
Yeah,
There's probably, there was ways to respond to Jesus that are more superficial and seemingly like, in the same way that someone who would have to like relinquish some of their power or whatever because they're following Jesus, they'd have to learn to nuance. What does it mean to really follow him? Jesus is going to call every single person to a deep transformation, no matter who you are.
Right.
Rich or poor, young or old, lots of power and influence, no power and influence. And so, as this week unfolds, not only is the identity of Jesus being manifested and being exposed, but all of the different responses to Jesus are going to be exposed as well.
Right.
And so here we're seeing, as you said, Dan, a real kind of head-to-head, hardness of heart confrontation with the religious and political elites. They're going to be very, very frustrated, and they're going to seek to seek to put Jesus to death here. So
Another one of those symbolic things that's happening, is Jesus is called the Word of God, and he is God with us. He's going into this temple, which is where the presence of God is, and where the Word of God is spoken.
yes,
And it's not, as there is greed, as there is injustice, as there is false teaching going on in the temple, it's not an accurate representation of the presence of God, and it's certainly not an accurate message of the Word of God. And so Jesus comes as the presence of God into the place of God to speak the Word of God. And so you've got just this really, there's an authority claim that's being made here by Jesus too. He's not just some good prophet, but he is coming as the owner of that building, so to speak.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, when he says, "My house
Right.
will be called a house of prayer." Yeah, there's definitely, wonderful. So that's Monday. So just to review, Monday was 2 simple events. He cursed the fig tree, and he quote unquote cleansed the temple, or enacted destruction upon it. And then tomorrow, we're going to see. This is probably, I say it's a lot. The response to that, but it's one of my favorite days ever, as Jesus interacts with these people who are like, well, wait a minute, what happened here?
Now the gloves are coming off.
Yeah, and so we're going to see what these powerful symbolic actions by Jesus, because again, he's done some teaching on the Sunday, a little bit, but it's not really recorded.
Right. He's just stirring people up.
Yeah, well, he's not just for the sake of stirring people up.
Course.
He's literally coming. He's announcing, "Yep, I'm the King. I'm the presence of God. This is who I am, and now how are people going to respond?" And so those are the first 2 days of the week.